Thank you to everyone for coming here today. I know it's Valentine's Day. I hope you're feeling the engineering love today. We really appreciate you coming here today. And as mentioned, I know this is kind of a first of its kind of this convening of early career engineers. So really excited for you to be here today. Of course, I know we're all excited for the woman on my right to be here today, Frances Arnold. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to be doing a fireside chat where we're really going to be diving into your experiences in science and engineering and entrepreneurship and government, and also being on the Big Bang Theory. So we're going to try to get through all of that here today. I'll give a little bit of a brief introduction to Dr. Frances Arnold, but I'm going to pretty quickly turn it over to you to tell everyone about the work that you do and the pioneering work that they will all hear about today. So Frances Arnold is the Linus Pauling Professor of Chemical Engineering, Bioengineering, and Biochemistry at Caltech. She was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2018 for pioneering directed enzyme evolution and has used directed protein evolution for applications in alternative energy, chemicals, and medicine. Her lab is expanding DNA-encoded chemistry by discovery and optimization of new-to-nature enzyme activities, and her group also develops methods for machine learning-guided enzyme evolution and discovery. But as you know, there's many awards. She's a member of multiple academies. But I think what I'd love to start with is actually just letting you give an opportunity to give an overview of your current work to this audience here today. And I know we have representatives from all different disciplines, all different areas of academia and industry. But we'll go ahead and kick it off for you just to share the work that you're doing and the pioneering work that you're doing.
Thanks, Deanne. I just want to give a shout out to the early stage engineers. I've always enjoyed this gathering of different disciplines and viewpoints, but with an engineering bent, and that kind of thing took me early in my career. Do you know that I was the very first speaker at the first Frontiers of Engineering meeting back in the early 1990s, 1995, and that was just so much fun because it forced me to talk about my science, which is pretty detailed chemistry and molecular biology, to an audience of people who really weren't all that interested in it, and to get people interested. But it was, and I'm a late stage engineer. I'll just point that out. But I've had many fun experiences with early stage engineers. And taking it back to what I'm interested in, I realized that if you want to connect with people, you have to find out what are they fundamentally interested in. Why does half the world watch the Big Bang Theory, for example? I couldn't figure it out. But most people are interested in evolution. They find evolution just fundamentally exciting. And that's what I do for a living. I evolve things like you breed cats and dogs. I can make molecules that have very weird properties. So I make basically the equivalent of a French bulldog of molecules.
I love that. Directed enzyme evolution is equivalent to bulldogs.
French bulldogs.
French bulldogs, exactly. So obviously, you received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2018. I guess, talk to me a little bit about the innovation mindset. Obviously all of us work in science and engineering. In that process, and I'm going to segment this to you as an individual versus creating an environment for innovation. Talk to me about that process of feeling like, did it feel like this is the inevitable and everyone was racing to the finish? Did it feel like you were going rogue, doing something that no one else had done before? Talk to me just about that process of innovation and how to stay resilient throughout that.
Boy, that could take an hour.
In 2 minutes or less.
Exactly. I didn't have a mindset of innovation. I had a problem I wanted to solve, which was how do you engineer the biological world? Think about this. It was probably about 1989. This was the beginning of the DNA revolution, right? When we could cut and paste DNA for the first time. What could you do with that? Instead of engineering a bioreactor, I could suddenly think about engineering the biological system itself to perform well, say, in an engineering problem. So I said, okay, I'm going to use this new technology and engineer life, engineer the code of life. That's a big, kind of a big vision, but lots of people had that vision. They just didn't have any clue how to do it, okay? And that was my big advantage because I came in completely from left field as an engineer, not a molecular biologist.
Great. And as you're going through, this journey of discovery, this journey of coming from left field, how did you deal with, setbacks along the way, and persevere through that?
Well, so I'm sure many of you have been through this, right? If you take on a problem that, say, the molecular biologist, and it was at the time the structural biologist, all those Nobel Prize winners, thought they owned, that they would get the structure of these great, big, amazing molecules, these catalysts of life, and that would take years. And then they would go in and hypothesize what changes you'd need to make in order to confer new properties. And they thought that that was the only way to think about solving the problem. And I come in as an engineer and I looked at this and said, that'll never work because they're just too complicated and we don't know the physical rules for that. And anyway, the best designer on the planet doesn't do it that way. Evolution is the best engineer on the planet. So why not use the process that's proven to work? So here comes the setbacks. They said, that's not science. To make random mutations, for example, and just screen lots of things and then accumulate mutations over multiple genes. They said, that's not science. And gentlemen, don't do it that way. Well, I'm an engineer, and I'm certainly not a gentleman. So I felt totally free to just go and do it my way.
Wonderful. So I guess was there an aha moment where you're like, I've got it, I figured it out?
Yes.
I want to know what that day was like, what that moment was like.
It came early on,
okay,
which gave me a lot of confidence. It came early on because when I started doing evolutionary experiments, and it's a molecular optimization. You all understand this. You kind of search the optimization space, and basically we just applied a random uphill walk on an optimization space whose structure we really didn't know, but it has to be kind of smooth, otherwise we wouldn't be here to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And it worked right away. I was able to find new properties in enzymes with not very many changes. And the changes that were made, nobody could explain them. So I knew that I had gold. I had found gold. I could alter the properties of enzymes in useful ways, like what natural enzyme wants to work in your laundry machine. They don't like bleach. They don't like surfactants, but you can evolve them to like that. And so my methods were used all over industry to solve all sorts of problems, but I knew right away that they would be good. It just took 35 years for everybody else to figure that out.
And I know you mentioned that you want to use the latest advancements, latest technologies. So the Nobel Prize that you received was in 2018, obviously so significant, but so much has changed since 2018. So talk to us a little bit about your current work now in the lab and how you've built upon that success.
I believe that good engineers should replace themselves before somebody else comes in. Directed evolution is experimentally painful and time consuming. So we're doing, experimental optimizations where you really have to screen things and then take the next one to parent the next generation. And it's expensive and slow. In the old days, we would just throw the data away. We'd screen thousands of things and throw the data away. Obviously, what you do in the new days is machine learning. And that was made possible by really inexpensive DNA sequencing technology. So starting about 14 years ago, we started applying machine learning to drive directed evolution. Now we do what's called machine learning guided evolution. And then the new advances in generative AI mean that instead of just waiting for something that we should optimize to pop up in nature or finding it in databases, we can actually generate sequences with new functions. So this is such an exciting time. This is where I feel the same excitement that many of you young people do. We are just at the beginning of genetically encoding all of chemistry. That's my goal over the next 10 years, is to be able to genetically encode all of chemistry, including the chemistry invented by humans, but never found in nature, because we can now hallucinate new enzyme starting points, and then with a reliable optimization, we can optimize it. And all that is, you can do it with automated laboratory experiments. So I see a day, hopefully before I retire, where we can push a button and genetically encode any chemistry you want.
Wow.
Of course, it has to be thermodynamically feasible, little details like that. But wouldn't that be marvelous? And then you could just send a DNA sequence to Mars and you can make anything you want.
Amazing. So I have a background in mechanical engineering, admittedly not an enzyme expert, but talk to me about the commercial applications of what you're talking about. I mean, you just talked about it. We could send it to Mars. But the work that you're doing, you know, a lot of times there's this work done in a lab, but then it crosses over, obviously, into industry. So just kind of 101 on the applications of the work you're doing in industry.
Well, my first industrially sponsored project was with Procter & Gamble back in the early 1990s to make laundry detergent enzymes. Okay. And they said, can you give us an enzyme that'll work at all temperatures? And I said, sure, but it won't take stains off of clothes, because I had no way to screen for that property. And they said, fine, just show it's possible. And we did that. So that was, you know, just a little example of a fun project. We showed that we could make enzymes that work across a wide spectrum of temperatures, which is not a biologically relevant function, but it's physically possible. Just like a French bulldog is not biologically relevant, it's not even fit, can hardly reproduce, but it's physically possible because we could choose who goes on to parent the next generation. But over the years, I worked on all sorts of things that I was interested in from my career as a mechanical engineer. I started off in the solar energy industry, actually at the Solar Energy Research Institute when Carter was president, because I really wanted to work on renewable energy. So we started making enzymes for biofuels production and made the first, we had one of the very first companies that could make sustainable aviation fuel, went public in 2011, and is still in business, hasn't made a penny of profit as far as, as far as I know. But we've worked on crop protection, so making insect pheromones for crop protection, APIs for pharmaceuticals, non-canonical amino acids. A number of companies have spun out from my laboratory, and then many other companies licensed the technology. Merck has licensed a number of things from us for clean manufacturing of chemicals. So it's one of those very broadly based technologies. Anywhere biology can be useful, from medicine to chemicals to materials, this is a kind of a fundamental process that helps improve it.
Great. And you know, when we talked about discussing your experiences in entrepreneurship, so obviously there's so much scientific discovery and engineering work going on, but how did you take that big leap to then, you know, first be involved with founding a company or getting involved in the entrepreneurship side of your research?
Well, I think most of us watch what the other monkeys do, right? I spent a lot of time watching other people who were successful or not in entrepreneurship. I tried it once and was not successful as a partner with somebody else. And then I started learning, what does it take to have a good idea that has some success? And it takes a team, it takes money, it takes somebody really to drive it. And I started learning, what does it take to put all those things together so that now we're a bit more successful.
Great. Speaking about that team, we talked a bit about sort of your personal sort of road for being a pioneer, but also I want to talk about the value of a team. Obviously, at a lab, you collaborate with so many different people. With these companies, you collaborate with so many different people. Talk to me about what you value in terms of fostering an environment that supports innovation, that lets it thrive.
I've done a lot of thinking about that, Deanne. And I learned it not at the beginning. I didn't know how important it was to put a team together and to choose the right people who support each other and do teamwork. Because when you think about the science that I do, it brings in pieces from computer science, molecular biology, organic chemistry. No one person has all those, so it won't succeed without a team. And that's true for most interesting projects. So I learned I learned this when I disappeared for a year.
Okay.
I went on sabbatical for a year and left my group to figure it out. But before I left, I hired people who help other people. They weren't the top producers of publications, but in the letters of recommendation, it said, this is the person to whom everyone goes for advice. And I underlined that, and I hired 3 or 4 of those people, and then I could disappear. Now, my disappearance also helped because it forced people to become independent and to rely on each other, but become independent. And so it turns out we produced more independent people and more publications in top journals the year I was gone than when I stayed. And I said, this is an interesting experiment. Maybe I should continue on this. And of course, I'm very lucky at Caltech. I get really brilliant students, and most of them want my job or a job like mine. So I don't feel too bad about saying, well, you go ahead, you do my job, which allows me to go and do some other things.
Wow. And just let them step up to the plate.
Yeah, step up, have high expectations, and hire the right people.
Great. And you mentioned earlier that you started in mechanical engineering, and obviously you have a Nobel Prize in chemistry. So at some point you decided, you know what, I want to go back and get my PhD in chemical engineering. And there's a big, I realize my microphone's too far away, isn't it? There's a big pivot there. And I think a lot of us in the room as early career engineers, sometimes it's like, is this my trajectory? Am I pivoting? I'm exposed to these different things. You're at these convenings, you meet other people with different interests. I guess talk to me about that process of embracing the pivot, following sort of some of these things that come in sideways, and how to embrace that, and how that process was for you to kind of pivot your focus.
Sometimes students come to me and say, oh, I don't know how I'm going to learn this machine learning because I'm a chemistry major. And I said, since when did you stop being able to do everything or anything, right? Since when did you stop being able to learn? And they go, oh, you're right, I should just go out and do it. I've done that my whole life, which is why I get accused of practicing without a license, but I don't feel I have to know it all in order to bring ideas, to steal ideas from other disciplines. So I think too many times we want to be perfect, or we want to be deeply educated in this field, but I'm an engineer, know enough to be dangerous is how I feel.
I love that. Dive in and you'll figure it out.
Dive in and do it. And dive in and create it. If it's not known, be the first to do it. That's why we work on problems. We work on a lot of problems that nobody ever even knew were problems. And then suddenly we do it and they go, I never even thought of that.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff. And it's so much fun.
So I was saying earlier when we first met that I read your autobiography on the Nobel Prize site, and I was saying I've read a good bit about you, but one of the things that I read was about how in high school you were leaving the nest and following some passions, and it sounds like you've always had a very independent and brave spirit to go after what you want. So just share some fun stories, I guess, about growing up and really, what you think cultivated you, Frances, into who you are to be so pioneering.
I have no idea. But I grew up in a time where everyone was questioning what matters. This was the early 1970s. Vietnam was in full bore. Young people didn't trust their elders. We were questioning everything. We were protesting everything, whether we knew anything about it or not. And that whole environment, women were starting to say, hey, wait, I can do anything. And my father said to me, Frances, no one is ever going to want to marry you. So you should get a career where you'll get a job, which is why I went into mechanical engineering. He said, you'll always have a job. And you know what? He was right. I've always had a job. And that was, so I have just done what I thought would be interesting. And at the time, whether it was driving taxis or working at a jazz club or being on my own.
Yeah. And what things, you always do what you think's interesting, what things do you find interesting as of late that you like to put your passions towards? I know we talked about entrepreneurship, your role with Alphabet. Do you want to tell the audience about your role with Alphabet?
Oh, well, after I won the Nobel Prize, suddenly I became a good catch for board seats.
Okay.
No, actually, I shouldn't joke. I joined the board of directors of Alphabet, which is a super interesting place to be these days, as you might imagine. But I have some background in AI and machine learning, and I've just been going on a wonderful ride. I have to say, the technology is the fastest moving technology that probably any of us has experienced in all of our careers. And yeah, I'm just holding on for dear life there.
So entrepreneurship, Alphabet. I know you've also worked in the government sector as well, and I definitely I'm gonna tee up as well that I'm gonna be pivoting out to the audience for questions. So start thinking in your minds about what questions you'd like to ask Frances. But you also had an appearance in The Big Bang Theory. We want to hear about that experience as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, gosh. So the Big Bang Theory, I don't know what got into their heads to take these really sweet graduate students in physics, and over 12 seasons, they're becoming professors. It's already going downhill. And not only are they becoming professors, but they're lobbying for Nobel Prizes. So it's pretty good that, the show is over 12 seasons of that. But they called me up. This was 2019, and said, I live right next to Warner Brothers Studios. I just went down the street, and they said, do you want to appear on The Big Bang Theory? And I said, sure, that'd be fun. And I said, I'll do it for free. They said, no, you can't do it for free. We'll pay you as an extra. And so I show up, and I wasted a perfectly good morning filming Sheldon giving me oatmeal raisin cookies to bribe me for a Nobel Prize. Well, little did I know that I really didn't, I didn't know that much about Big Bang Theory because I haven't watched TV since I was a kid. And they said, oh, you have to bring your own clothes. So I watched a couple of episodes. And I said, oh my goodness, I don't have anything that ugly. But it was so much fun. And I didn't understand how many people here watch The Big Bang Theory. Come on, raise your hands. Yeah, a significant fraction. I guess it's charming. All over the world, people watch it. And I get residuals from that one morning.
That oatmeal
Yeah,
raisin cookie
they paid
morning.
me as an extra, but so please go and watch the Nobel accumulation because I still get. But many more people have seen me on that than anything having to do with anything I actually did.
But it also displays the role of media. You know, there's so much great work that's being done, but we need to have convenings like this where we can share that and need to get it out there in the media for visibility.
Absolutely. It touches people's deep interest in physics, in science, in the people who do science. It is by far the most effective. Caltech is a nerd farm. We take little nerds and turn them into really big nerds. I tell you, those kids who watch Big Bang Theory, those are the ones we want. It is really effective. So Caltech has a pretty good outreach with the film industry and Kip Thorne with Interstellar and all that. I have to figure out how to do evolution. We need an evolution version of Big Bang Theory.
We'll work on that. We'll pitch it. It'll be great. I'm going to pivot to see if we have any questions in the audience. So many experiences here that Francis can share and talk about. Does anyone have a question? Go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question. And while we're going to bring the microphones around. I'm sorry, there's a light in my face. So I just want to make sure we know the operations. Is the microphone over there? Yes. Okay, great.
Could you explain to me how AI works when you use it? I've tried it to reinvent stuff that already exists, and it's a plagiarist. It doesn't come up with anything.
Well, let's talk about evolution, which is, right, and when you're talking about AI, you're thinking large language models, right? So let's apply a large language models to DNA, which is what they do to create new enzymes, or what some people have done to create new enzymes. We have many examples now in the databases of DNA that encodes chemical functions. AI can learn from those data and generate new versions, right? It would be like plagiarism, only those new versions have very interesting new properties in some cases, which is exactly what evolution does. It takes old stuff and mutates it to make new versions. And perhaps it doesn't create something way out of distribution, we say, but it can do a lot to create something useful. Now, in the new days, even more exciting, and this was the Nobel Prize just last year for David Baker, new models that are not large language models can actually take what you know about, say, a chemical reaction and build a protein structure around that that has a chance of catalyzing that reaction. Usually they're terrible, right? The designs are terrible. But unlike, what you write, you don't have a good editor. But evolution is the best editor that you can imagine. So we can take all this terrible literature that AI generates, and we can make it really good. So in biology, we have a very powerful system for creation and optimization now.
Great question. We have another question right here, hand up.
I'm Herdeline Ardonia from UCI Chemical Engineering. So mentioning Big Bang Theory prompts me some things about public communication of the science that we do. Earlier you mentioned about the work that you've done clearly has opened up the possibility of genetically encoding chemistry, and it really tells us you can do chemistry, anything you want, kind of what you're saying earlier. Can you maybe share some insights about how to communicate to the public the responsible use of this kind of technology?
The responsible use is in the examples, right? What is it that you want to do? If you can genetically encode any new chemistry, what do you do with that? And does it solve a problem, that impacts people in a positive way? So I always give really interesting examples. I give fun examples that have no use whatsoever today, but I also give examples that solve real problems. And the real problem that we're dealing with today is that chemistry is dirty. It, usually comes from oil, and it creates a lot of waste products. The way the humans do chemistry uses precious metals whose mining causes environmental destruction. When nature does chemistry, it's clean and it's recyclable. And so the vision, if you can genetically encode chemistry, you can start using carbon dioxide, and you can have recyclable materials, and you can make things without platinum or iridium or palladium that we currently use. So when you communicate it by what drives you, then you can, have a responsible use, I think. And of course, everyone asks, oh, but what about the irresponsible uses, right? You could make Novichok or something like that, and people worry about that. But chemistry can make all of those things.
Nature always proving to be one of the greatest engineers. Yes. Oh, over here. I'm sorry.
Hi.
That light. I can't see.
Eva Lerner Lamb. I'm a civil engineer, but I'm working on developing principles for knowledge bases that would be used by AI tools, agentic AIs. I was wondering, because you have a background and you're still collecting residuals from the film industry or the TV industry, I was wondering what your thoughts might be about having the creators of data that is stored in knowledge bases be compensated in the same manner in which people who receive residuals in the film and TV industry can receive residuals.
Honestly, I don't know enough about that topic to give you a thoughtful answer there. Ideally, in an ideal world, the creators will join in the benefits, but when you put your things out into the internet, some people think that means they're free and free to use.
Doesn't make sense, does it?
Well, I don't know whether it makes sense. If we look at the protein data bank, the Nobel Prize that went to Demis Hassabis and John Jumper for their AlphaFold, they used 50 years worth of data collected at the cost of the US government and the price of many, many PhDs worth of work that were deposited into a public database whose goal was to promote the science. Okay, so these people build an AI tool that exploited all the data in the database. Was that bad? No.
Would that be bad?
Well, yeah, I mean, if there's some way to pay, for 50 years of government-funded research, I wish there was a good way to do it, but I personally don't know how you do that.
Actors get residuals. There's got to be a way for data creators to get residuals.
Great, all right. It's not my field.
Yeah, but it sounds like a conversation worth continuing and brainstorming for sure. Other questions we have here? Yes, back. We have the white sweater here.
Thanks. Thank you for the insights. Those are very. Oh, sorry. Is that?
Yeah, you're first. Yes,
Okay,
go ahead.
okay.
And then
Yeah.
you can pass it to your right when you're done.
Okay, yeah. Those are very inspiring. I have a question about one of your points that you made, that we should branch out and pivot our research directions because we're learning all the time. But specifically for early career, right, the overhead sometimes to branch out could be really high because we have to show people that we have demonstrated track record to convince that we're worth investing, right? So how do you see the balance between sticking to our field by training so that we can really develop and build up and branching out to learn new stuff?
I hear you. And we've become so conservative, right? And the system drives this conservatism. Don't branch out too much because you get your hand chopped off, right? I mean, that's what the system is driving us towards, and I bemoan that. For 17 years, I served as chair and on the committee of the Packard Foundation Fellowships for Science and Technology, and there might be some Packard fellows here in the audience. That's a program that's near and dear to my heart because it gave a lot of money back in the day. Now it's, not quite as much, to do whatever you thought would help your career. And that gave financial freedom to go out and try something new. So I had that, and that helped me quite a bit. So I love these, no strings attached. The MacArthur Fellowship is like that. No strings attached, but that's usually given too late to make the big difference. You want some early career support, but not everybody does the right thing with that, right? If you just give it out willy-nilly. So then the question is, who should you give these to, But
Great question. Yes, right here.
Hi, my name is Angel. I'm with Amgen Process Development. My question is, what would you say are the characteristics of a successful academic-industry collaboration?
Oh, I was just talking, that's a great question. I was just talking to a student, a postdoc in my group who's a chemist, and she thinks she wants to do fundamental chemistry. And she said, oh, I don't want to do industrial projects because they won't be interesting. And I said, wow, that is the wrong attitude. That is totally the wrong attitude. It's your job to take an industrial problem and make it interesting. Find the parts of it that are fundamentally novel, that require you to go into a new way of thinking about a problem, and turn it into something that pleases both parties, both your sponsor and yourself. And throughout my career, I've had many industrial projects that I can describe as both really, really interesting, but also that serve the purposes of the sponsor. But if you go into it with the attitude, there's no way this is going to be interesting. Some of them, it's true, there's no way it's going to be interesting. But it's your job to convince the sponsor that maybe they should expand it a little bit to, go into, say, a more fundamentally interesting question. But I've had so many collaborations with industry over the year, one after another, that allowed me to do really different things.
Great. We have a question here on the end.
Yes. Okay, this is working. I'm Carrie Mills. I'm at UC Santa Barbara. I was wondering if you could comment on, you mentioned this ability to kind of know that what you were doing was really counter to what structural biologists and perhaps molecular biologists were doing at the time, but you knew it was right. How do you balance, or do you have any advice to give, especially for young people in the audience, that drive that you're right with a little bit of realism and knowing when you're right, if that makes sense?
I think I was highly non-realistic. But I knew I was right. And also I was protected because I was not in a structural biology department, right? Had I been judged by structural biologists, I wouldn't have survived. But I was judged by engineers. And they said, well, she might have something. So, and they understood that structural biologists might not appreciate, that you can make random mutations and find new properties. So it makes, you have to be judged by the right people and protected by the right people while you're doing this exploration. And I have one really helpful property. Criticism, I can divide it into the pieces that are useful. The rest of it goes in this ear and right out that one. And so you just have to ignore some of the things that and people have said just absurd things over the years.
Hi, this is Rose Yu from UC San Diego. So I really like the sentence you mentioned about practicing without a license, which really reflect the challenge of interdisciplinary research. So I was wondering whether you can share some advice about how do you overcome these kind of challenges in interdisciplinary research, breaking into new terrains, and especially to get recognition from fields that's not your own field. And that's much harder, say, for early careers before you get a Nobel Award.
You'll never please everybody. Oh my goodness, the chemists are still grousing that a chemical engineer got the Nobel Prize. None of the chemists accuse me of being a chemist. So, you don't need to please other fields, right? You need to please yourself and maybe your local environment, whatever that matters. But, to have everybody recognize that what you do is valuable, it's never going to happen, right? So even at my stage, it doesn't happen. So I can join you. But you know what? It doesn't bother me because I know that what I do is valuable. I have many examples to show it's valuable, and I don't pretend that it solves, all their problems either, right? So also be realistic about what you can do. Although I have to tell you, there is no algorithm more powerful than evolution. Works at all scales from molecules to ecosystems. So engineers should be doing a lot more with evolution than we are. But that said, it'll take a while before the rest of the world agrees.
Great question. All right, I think our next question is here.
Hi, Jorge Luis Barrera, Lawrence Human National Lab. So, next to my, oh, perfect. Thank you for the tip, yeah. So, Jorge Luis Barrera, Lawrence Human National Lab. So, throughout your career, you have tried a number of things, right? You've been extremely successful in many of those, but not all of them, right? So, as an early career, so when is it a good time to move on? Like, as an engineer, right, like, do you have any protocol, a systematic way of saying, hey, this is going south, so we should probably move on, do something different? Or is it more like how you feel about it? Like you said, like, hey, sometimes you have to be stubborn, yeah, to achieve what you want, but sometimes you probably need to try new different paths, right?
Oh, that's
Great question.
Yeah, that's a really important question, because when you think about it, I've had maybe 10 different lives, right? I've gone in many different directions. The only thing that stayed put is Caltech, right? I've stayed in one place, but I've had many different careers, and some, as you're absolutely right, some have been successful and other ones haven't been so successful. But the ability to, constantly look at it critically and then open new doors. So you don't have to run away from something, you're just moving into a new door, right? So I think that's what evolution is all about. Some lines go extinct, totally natural, but the most effective ones, the ones that give you joy. So early in my career, I tried 3 or 4 things, and I was mediocre at them, but I knew I'd never be, the best in the world, and that's the criteria at Caltech. And I found that engineering proteins by evolution gave me joy. So I just dropped everything, and this was 5 years into my position. I dropped everything and put all my eggs in a basket that everyone else said was not even science. So it has to come from what makes you happy. And I realized that is what I wanted to talk about. That is what I wanted to work on. And you just do it. All those other versions of me that took the other directions, they went extinct. And a bunch of other ones, that made the same decision also weren't successful. There's a big random chance aspect to this as well. So you might as well optimize your happiness.
It's a great answer to a great question. I love, even in career trajectory, you're using the analog of evolution, and how it can be applied to pretty much anything, any field, any career, which is great. And we have a question here, but I'm going to follow on that, because you said, I've had 10 different lives, all under the umbrella of Caltech. Why don't you just explain the role that academic institution has played in kind of nurturing all of those 10 different lives?
Anybody from Caltech here? I can't. Okay, yeah. All right. Yeah, Caltech. Yeah, so Caltech, it's a very special jewel of a place. It's really small. We all know each other. It's easy to talk to people in different disciplines. And let me tell you, everybody there is super, super smart. There's no dead weight except for me. So it's just a place where you're surrounded by people who are at the top of their game and excited about science. So that just promotes discussions and innovation. We hire amazing people. We have of fabulous students, and it's just fun to come every day, even though I don't come every day. You know, I spent the last 4 years working for President Biden. We didn't talk about that life, so I had to take 4 years back away, not fully from science, but I was the co-chair of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. I turned into a bumpkin January 19th. I'm out of Washington, but that's a very different life. But Caltech gave me the room to do that, to do public service. They detailed me to Washington, we say, and I learned a whole new set of tricks, which I hope never to use again. So you have to try different things, and I felt more of an obligation rather than dying curiosity to know what public policy would be like.
Right. But there's so much involved with, not only, your own role in pursuit of innovation, but then we talked about your lab, but then it's, the institution above that, creating the space for that innovation to thrive, and then even thinking on a national level. So so it's just a testament to coming to things like these events and letting that innovation thrive. We had a question here. Yes, right there.
Thank you. My name is Marissa from UCLA Engineering. My question is actually was about your time in government. I guess a follow-up question is, I would like to hear your thoughts on the landscape of science today versus, say, the early 90s, and what we as junior faculty, how we navigate somewhat of a tumultuous time.
Well, I'd like to think that engineers will navigate this reasonably well, right? Because we work on interesting problems and come up with useful solutions in many cases. I fear that fundamental science and biomedical science will both, be under pressure, be under significant pressure. What's quite interesting is that industrial support of science has increased a lot over the last few years. And so industry is kind of stepping up. And that's why I encourage people to look, search out collaborations with industry, because you can get support for more fundamental ideas from industry. So the more open you are to listening to other people and networking, I think John knows this very well, that putting ideas together and networking, these are all really important, that we engineers will continue to serve society and our value will be recognized.
Great. So we have a question here. Yes.
Let you know that I was at Caltech, but I was at Caltech in 1966, and there were no women on the faculty. There were no women students, but they took women postdocs.
Oh, good for you.
Remind people the world has changed a lot, and I agree with absolutely everything you said. It could be my life, even though I left Caltech with a hatred, an absolute hatred of the place. But because, of course, because they didn't allow women, and when it was because women weren't good enough to do it. Wonderful to see you here. And the fact is, I was lucky enough to work on a Nobel Prize winner at MIT for my PhD. And then at Caltech, I saw all these people saying how great they were. And I left and I couldn't do anything. It took me a long time to realize I could do something. And part of my advice is, if you're not a Nobel Prize winner, junior Nobel Prize winner, and you're really worried about your career, don't glamorize these famous people. Start realizing there are lots of places where you can make a difference and feel proud of what you're doing, even if it's not Nobel Prize work.
Thank you. I think that point is so good. And I think we all, from an evolutionary standpoint, we all stand on the shoulders of those in this industry that have come before us. And, there's so many different sectors, so many different fields, and so many different opportunities. And of course, we all aspire to get a Nobel Prize one day or give someone an oatmeal raisin cookie on the Big
But
Bang Theory.
I think you're absolutely right, though. The chances of winning a Nobel Prize are effectively zero, right? So to think that that's your career is absurd. And I meet those people. Believe me, there are people who lobby in real life. It's not just Sheldon on Big Bang Theory. There are people in real life who think that they deserve a Nobel Prize. But it's decided by some little crew in Sweden in a very small country, right? And so there's nothing fair or, but it is recognized as something important around the world. Don't go for the Nobel Prize. Go for what makes you happy every day, right? And I think that's what you're saying.
I think so. Great. Actually, we have 2 minutes left, and I want to make sure we have one question here, but I know we need to wrap up. So if it's like Twitter length, I will take it. Is it Twitter length, the question?
It's pretty short.
Okay.
You talked about the use of evolutionary techniques for generating new materials, and you also talked about using generative approaches and the screening. Within the last year, there's been some really interesting work published using diffusion models, working from...
That was the Nobel Prize in protein design, was a diffusion model.
Right, and so it seems like that may be, again, a promising approach where you can actually describe the material.
I agree, we
Right.
do that in my lab,
Yeah.
No, there are new methods, and again, this is just, we're at the beginning of the exponential phase for this new technology. There's so many opportunities. Nothing is set in stone now, right? There's new algorithms coming out. There's DeepSeek that comes along and, makes everybody's hair on fire. And, this is going to happen a lot. And there'll be a lot of improvements and a lot of innovations that will dictate how this future goes. And I find it an incredibly exciting time.
An incredibly exciting time indeed, and an incredibly exciting time today to be able to have this opportunity to listen to you, Frances, and hear about all of your experiences. I guess I just want to close with giving you the opportunity just to give some final words to our early career engineers that are in this room, but also maybe watching the live stream. So I will let you conclude this session with just some final parting words for our young engineers.
All right. When I look back on my career, I'm a late stage engineer. What are the things that have given me joy? The things that have given me joy and that matter are all the fabulous students that I've mentored over the years, my family, my grandson. It's all about the people, right? And if your technology helps people, you will get that joy as well. Don't forget that it's really all about science impacting and engineering impacting people. And then you'll be happy when you're at the late stage of your career.
Thank you so much, Dr. Frances Arnold.